Your mother had always told you the man sitting next to me, Mr. Booker, was your father. 13 years old, Mr. Chossy admitted he could be your biological father. You were in an open relationship with your ex-husband, Mr. Booker, while also seeing Mr. Chossy.
2 older sisters, and they're both very skinny with blonde hair and blue eyes. I look absolutely nothing like them. Mr. Chossy, I have his eyes, I have his nose, I have his hair, I look life. I knew I was different. My sisters would even tell me I was adopted all the time.
You know, siblings can be cruel in that way. Inside, you already felt different.
Knew in my heart that my mother was hiding something from me, and I could never get her to admit it until I finally pulled Mr. Chossy aside and say, "I'm not yours. I dare you." And he said, "There's a possibility, but your mother's reassured me that it's..."
Inside Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom, the tension is not about who sits where, but about decades of silence finally colliding with evidence. The emotional layers are not theatrical, not chaotic, just painfully human. What is unfolding in this case is a direct confrontation between memory, denial, marital collapse, parental identity, and the way the law forces every person to finally answer. In this hearing, Judge Lauren Lake becomes not just a legal authority, but the symbol of what the relationship between law and justice should look like when testimony has been tangled for years. The mother, the alleged father, the man who raised the child, the sister, and the now-grown daughter are all present, each with their own version of truth. The courtroom presence is not about anger. It is about the lifelong psychological cost of answers delayed. The mother is emotional yet defensive. The daughter is torn between biological truth and emotional loyalty. And the man who raised her holds onto identity as parent even while DNA has been demanded to confirm what love alone may no longer be allowed to certify. Judge Lauren Lake listens not to drama, but to generational confusion. A woman raised by one man while always resembling another. The difference between physical likeness and legal paternity. The conflict between what a child deserves to know and what adults fear will explode once spoken. It becomes clear that people regret taking decisions that postpone truth, not discovering it. DNA becomes the tool that ends decades of avoidance. This is not merely a DNA test. It represents the precise moment where truth changes everything, including relationships that once felt unbreakable. In this environment, legal language meets emotional consequence. The mother admits she hid the possibility of another father, not because she was cruel, but because she feared losing love, marriage, and stability. Judge Lauren Lake recognizes that the mother carried guilt disguised as protection, yet the daughter experienced isolation disguised as normalcy. This is why the court exists, to separate emotional justification from legal obligation, to allow truth to exist even when hearts tremble. Throughout testimony, Judge Lauren Lake references the foundation of legal fairness, not theatrics, not punishment but clarity. The daughter voices lifelong confusion shaped by physical differences from her sisters, her resemblance to another man, and the years of contradictory explanations. She speaks with the exhaustion of someone who has been forced to emotionally parent her parents. She is not angry for the sake of anger. She is angry because she begged for honesty and was handed shifting excuses. Her mother's choices, once defended as protection, are now revealed as decisions that fractured trust. The courtroom becomes more than a legal space. It becomes an emotional recovery chamber similar to the honesty found in Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where pain is not polished but spoken. The entire hearing mirrors themes often discussed in adoption stories, full episodes, where identity is not just genetic but emotional. Yet, genetics still matter because truth must be spoken aloud, not only carried privately. Judge Lauren Lake acknowledges that the heart wants to choose narrative, but the law demands evidence. She references the concept of the evidence stage in divorce case, reminding everyone that emotional memory cannot replace documented truth. The courtroom energy reflects the intellectual spirit of the Game Changing Attorney podcast, where the law becomes an instrument of human repair rather than punishment. In discussing parental identity, Lauren Lake highlights the concept of justice in jurisprudence. Justice is not always comfort, but it is always clarity. She also reminds both sides that adverse inference in evidence act applies when one party has withheld vital truths, and that decades of silence do not exempt anyone from eventual accountability. The mother's fear is acknowledged, but it cannot outweigh the daughter's right to certainty. This case does not revolve around dramatic accusations of DNA test, cheating stories, or manipulative schemes. Rather, it revolves around a quiet lie told in the hope of preserving a family picture. Yet that picture had edges too sharp to hide. The alleged second father, who resembles the daughter in mannerisms and features, becomes an emotional anchor in her longing for identity, even while the man who raised her clings to fatherhood with sincerity, not possession. As Judge Lauren Lake continues to question each family member, she does not shame them but guides them through the intellectual and emotional reckoning that DNA forces into public view. The daughter expresses that if truth had been given earlier, relationships might not have decayed under suspicion. She even admits to moments where she considered the emotional nuclear option, cutting ties, disappearing, letting resentment seal the past. But the courtroom shapes a different outcome, not revenge but redirection. There is a parallel resonance with the Divorce Course podcast, where marital breakdown is not just legal paperwork but psychological injury. The mother's choices were driven by fear of abandonment, the desire to keep a family portrait intact, and the desperation of a woman who believed that if she revealed uncertainty, she would lose both men and stability all at once. Yet, in protecting herself, she unknowingly damaged the emotional foundation of the daughter she sought to shield. Judge Lake highlights that Supreme Court child support principles exist because children should never bear the economic or emotional cost of adults' secrets. Even if love raised her, biology still required clarity. The court must determine parenthood not simply because it matters for paperwork, but because identity is an inheritance too. The emotional weight matches themes often addressed in high-profile legal discourse. That legal truth must prevail even when emotional truth hopes to remain untouched. Judge Lauren Lake ensures that every voice is heard not to escalate conflict, but to release years of internal confusion. This case is not about shame but transformation, not about exposing someone's worst choices, but finally allowing someone else to breathe without doubt. The daughter discovers that identity cannot be permanently delayed, and parents learn that silence has legal consequences. Judge Lake ends this phase of the hearing by reinforcing that truth, once confirmed through DNA, does not erase love, but forces love to evolve honestly. No one leaves untouched, but everyone leaves unburdened by silence. This courtroom does not destroy families. It rebuilds them with facts instead of fear. As the hearing continues, Judge Lauren Lake makes it unmistakably clear. This is not a courtroom designed to punish a mother, embarrass a former partner, or glorify DNA drama. Instead, it is a tribunal where the human cost of withheld truth is examined with the full weight of law and the quiet ache of emotional honesty. What unfolds next is not about winning or losing, but about detoxifying a family system that hid too much for too long. The mother's voice shakes when she admits the fear that guided her decisions, a fear so primal it overpowered her duty to confess uncertainty. She believed that if she admitted the possibility of another biological father, everything she depended on, marriage, home structure, emotional stability, would collapse. Judge Lauren Lake listens not as a critic, but as the embodiment of judicial empathy. She acknowledges that fear is human, yet she also clarifies that the relationship between law and justice requires more than emotional rationalizations. It requires evidence, accountability, and disclosure. In this moment, the courtroom feels less like a legal chamber and more like a space where people celebrate recovery testimonies. Except the testimony here is not spiritual. It is biological, historical, and psychological. The daughter's voice carries a maturity sharpened by years of trying to assemble her own identity without foundational information. She expresses that the long-term silence created a form of internal exile. She was loved, yet misunderstood, connected, yet permanently misaligned with the truths around her. Judge Lauren Lake turns to the mother and emphasizes that while love can raise a child, it cannot erase biological facts. The law must address identity with the same seriousness that it addresses finances, marriage dissolution, and parental obligations. Here, parenting is not just emotional. It is jurisprudential, influenced by paternity law, rights of the child, and ethical doctrine, spelled out in legal frameworks that mirror those often discussed in the Divorce Course podcast and the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, where attorneys stress that truth is not simply a moral stance. It is a legal structure. The daughter admits that genetic resemblance became her lifelong internal evidence. She did not need a laboratory to sense discord. Her face, features, and genetics were a daily reminder that the puzzle she was given did not match the picture printed on the box. She spent years telling herself, "Maybe I'm overthinking," only to discover, as Judge Lake summarizes, that children should never have to doubt their own origin story. That doubt is inherited trauma. Judge Lauren Lake gently but firmly dissects the mother's contradictory timeline. First, she claimed she never knew the other man before birth. Then she admitted contact. Then she shifted to dinner. Then to emotional connection. Then to a brief affair. This layered disclosure reveals exactly why legal systems use doctrines like adverse inference in evidence act. When facts change under pressure, courts interpret silence and contradiction as meaningful, not accidental. Judge Lake stresses that this is not character assassination but legal logic. When truth is delayed, memory becomes unreliable, testimony fragments, and the cost lands upon the child. The man who raised the daughter remains steady, consistent, even when emotionally bruised. He does not relinquish identity because paperwork might contradict biology. He communicates that fatherhood to him is not a function of DNA, but of presence, sacrifice, and parental continuity. Judge Lauren Lake acknowledges that this belief aligns with the emotional truths reflected in adoption stories' full episodes, where families are defined not by blood but by enduring choice. Yet she balances this with a legal reminder. Biological facts still matter because identity is both emotional and factual. Here, truth exists in a dual state. Love selected him, but DNA still needed to speak. The alleged biological father's presence in the testimony is felt even without grand declarations. His resemblance to the daughter, his role in her internal narrative, and the years of unspoken possibility formed a psychological shadow she never escaped. Judge Lake explains that even when biological fathers do not actively seek paternity, the potential of their involvement carries legal relevance. The court must provide resolution so that the child, now an adult, can exist outside of speculation. This is exactly why DNA test people regret taking becomes an underlying theme. Not because DNA is harmful, but because the regret comes from wishing truth had been accepted earlier. People regret the test when it dismantles narratives built on emotional scaffolding. Yet Judge Lake reminds everyone that regret cannot determine identity. Evidence does. The daughter then reflects with heartbreaking clarity that she would have built her life differently if truth had been provided rather than rationed. She would not have internalized difference as defect. She would not have questioned whether she belonged. She would not have felt like a misprinted copy in a family portrait. In her hindsight, the DNA test is not betrayal. It is liberation. Judge Lauren Lake's judicial approach is not cold. It mirrors discussions seen in Supreme Court child support analyses, where courts rule that children deserve financial, emotional, and identity stability. She reiterates that while love raised this daughter, truth must still be delivered. Biology does not invalidate fatherhood but clarifies ancestry, heritage, and medical knowledge. Identity is not sentimental. It has legal weight. The mother finally admits that silence became her coping mechanism. She did not intend harm, yet harm occurred. She did not intend to lie, yet lies compounded. She did not intend to fracture trust, yet trust fractured. Judge Lauren Lake acknowledges the complexity, noting that intention does not erase outcome. This distinction reflects the concept of justice in jurisprudence. Justice focuses not on emotional excuses but on rightful restoration. No one leaves this courtroom victorious. This is not a competition. This is not tabloid drama. This is a legal restoration session where individuals are recalibrated to their factual selves. The mother grieves her decisions. The daughter grieves her lost clarity. The man who raised her grieves the possibility that biology might rewrite emotional titles. Yet Judge Lauren Lake ensures that grief here is transitional, not punitive. This hearing becomes a blueprint for understanding not only parental responsibility, but also identity rights. By the end of this stage of the proceeding, everyone recognizes that DNA testing is not humiliation, it is closure. Truth changes everything not because it destroys, but because it reconstructs without blurred lines. Judge Lauren Lake closes this segment by reminding all parties that law does not exist to shame families, but to return ownership of identity to the person who lived without it, the daughter. This is not a courtroom designed to break bonds, but to untangle them so that love, if it continues honestly. As the proceeding reaches its final stretch, the air in Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom shifts from defensive explanation to emotional surrender. What once sounded like self-justification now becomes a collective exhale. All participants, mother, daughter, father figure, potential father, extended family, stop arguing in their minds and start listening. It is no longer about who was right but about who was honest. Judge Lake reinforces a principle that echoes in both the Game-Changing Attorney podcast and the Divorce Course podcast. Truth is not a weapon but a correction. It is the legal recalibration that must occur when relationships have been carrying distorted history. The mother's secrecy, the father figure's loyalty, the daughter's lifelong identity conflict, all are now placed through the legal filter of evidence, fairness, and ethical responsibility. The long arc of family denial is finally dissolving, replaced by clarity delivered not through emotional outbursts, but through documented fact. The daughter expresses that if she had known her birth reality earlier, she could have lived without the weight of confusion. She might not have spent years comparing her face to others, silently wondering why she didn't match her siblings. She could have avoided interpreting difference as defect or inheritance as accident. She identifies this trial not as a punishment of her parents, but as a reclamation of her own selfhood. For decades she lived in emotional parentheses. Now, Judge Lauren Lake gives her linguistic closure. The court's mission becomes unmistakable. DNA test results are not merely numerical, they are existential. They determine identity, medical lineage, emotional narrative, and family history. They resolve contradictions that love alone cannot untangle. Judge Lauren Lake emphasizes that while affection can raise a child, it cannot erase factual truth. The courtroom therefore becomes both scientific and human, analytical yet compassionate. The mother finally verbalizes what she has avoided admitting for over 20 years. The silence was not indifference but panic. She feared losing both men, feared destabilizing religion, home, and marriage. She feared abandonment more than she feared falsehood. Yet, as Judge Lake gently explains, when fear governs disclosure, identity becomes collateral damage. The daughter lived in consequence while the mother lived in avoidance. The father figure who raised her with sincere devotion struggles silently but remains steady in his emotional claim. He states that fatherhood is not erased by DNA. It is carved by sleepless nights, school events, inside jokes, and memories that cannot be revoked. Judge Lauren Lake agrees yet clarifies the distinction. His love is valid, his parenting real, but legal truth still matters because identity is not an optional accessory. It is a civil right. This duality reflects what is often dissected in Supreme Court child support analyses. Emotional loyalty does not eliminate biological responsibility. The child, now adult, is entitled to accurate family structure. The court must deliver clarity even if clarity costs comfort. In the final stage of discussion, Judge Lake addresses a key jurisprudential principle. Concept of justice in jurisprudence is not only punishment and remedy, it is restoration. Restoration of identity, restoration of timeline, restoration of psychological grounding. No law can turn back the clock, yet the court can at least return truth to the person who lived without it. The mother's patterns of changing narrative, first denying contact with the other man, then minimizing it, then adjusting detail under pressure, demonstrate why legal systems employ tools like adverse inference in evidence act. Her shifting truth is not malicious but destabilizing. Judge Lauren Lake helps her see that silence is not protection when the cost is the child self-understanding. The courtroom atmosphere takes on the clarity often witnessed in Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where shame becomes less powerful once spoken aloud. Here, too, shame loses its grip. The daughter begins to express not anger but relief. The father figure expresses not threat but loyalty. Even the mother, after decades of rigidity, begins to soften, not because she is defeated, but because she is no longer holding history alone. Throughout this closing narrative, Judge Lauren Lake reminds every participant that truth changes everything not because it destroys families, but because it stops them from hiding from their own reflection. DNA testing is not an enemy, it is a mirror. While some families resist that mirror, fearing what it might confirm, this family eventually accepts that the mirror is not judgment, it is identity. Judge Lauren Lake makes one final observation that resonates beyond the courtroom. Even in DNA test people regret taking, regret is almost never about the truth itself. Regret is about lost time, delayed answers, and emotional labor that could have been spared if honesty had come sooner. It is about the heartbreak of realizing that identity could have been peaceful instead of turbulent. In this moment, the daughter no longer seeks perfect parents, just truthful ones. She acknowledges that the years of questioning were lonelier than the answer could ever be. Even if biology confirms the man who raised her, she now knows it because law, not silence, gave her the answer. And if biology pointed elsewhere, she would still have needed that clarity. In either direction, truth is justice. Judge Lake ends with a final instruction that aligns with every legal and emotional theme explored. Identity cannot be postponed. Parenthood cannot remain half-spoken. Secrecy cannot coexist with justice. There is no dramatic breakdown, no applause, no victory lap, just quiet acceptance. The mother recognizes that protection without truth becomes harm. The father figure recognizes that love is not diminished by DNA, it is clarified by it. The daughter recognizes that closure matters more than confirmation. And the court recognizes that justice is not punitive but corrective. In these final words, Judge Lauren Lake embodies both the spirit of law and the humanity of healing. This is what relationship between law and identity looks like. Not perfection but resolution. Not blame but acknowledgement. Not regret but release. What began as a paternity uncertainty concludes as emotional restoration. Silence dissolves. Identity stabilizes. And the courtroom, once tense with withheld history, becomes a space where truth finally sits without resistance. Because here, in Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom, truth changes everything.